Okay, I am supposed to talk about identity, faith, and Indian Constitution. And as we know, there is almost no controversy in India or no conflict which is not related to religion and faith. So it's like we are told that there's a dispute between Hindus and Muslims over Babri Masjid. There's a question of Muslim identity in Kashmir. There's a question of religious identity in Nagas. I want to say broadly that there is the question of religion, but a lot of this has nothing to do with religion. Not because I am for any religion, but it is a use of religion and a cover up for criminal activity. And I want to really show you that. And the second question is that why is the law and the constitution, although it has the provisions to deal with exactly these problems, is not effective or has not been effective? These are the two questions, and I'm going to try and deal with all the three: Babri Masjid, Kashmir, the taking away or nullifying of 370, and Indo-Naga talks, and to show you what is the interrelationship between so-called faith-related controversies or religious controversies. Now, I want, and I have sort of mixed up a bit of my biography because, well, I hope it will show you, because I don't want this as an abstract talk, but as something which we could perhaps in a discussion figure out what we could do and where we went wrong. At least where I went wrong. You can decide where you went wrong. So there it is. In November 1949, before the Indian Constitution was established, before it became in effect, a small group of bureaucrats had started already making the electoral rolls for universal suffrage. So you can imagine 173 million people in a country which had just become independent. And I also didn't really realize till I was writing this, is that what was that excitement of citizenship? And even before we became citizens, we became voters. And right in 1928, Nehru had said in his report called the Nehru Report, any artificial restrictions on the right to vote in a democratic constitution is an unwarranted restriction on democracy itself, and the colonial notion of keeping the numbers within reasonable bound for practical reasons has had to be faced. So he said 173 million adult voters will vote in this election, and a small group of bureaucrats whose names we do not even know unless we go into the archives, the unsung heroes, started this process in November 1949. And while this process was going on, we should remember that there was a partition. And a partition meant the horrors of partition I will not even try and recreate or talk about, but there were 18 million displaced people. So you just think of an electoral rolls of going around putting 18 million people on the electoral rolls who have been displaced and faced this partition. So here this was, and 2 million people had been killed in the riots or in the violence of the partition. So in this very, very charged atmosphere, there was going to be an election, and there was an election in February 1951, November 50 and February 1951, and it was an election which some people actually said that by late 1949, India pushed through the frontiers of the world's democratic imagination and gave birth to the largest democracy. And that was the hope, that we had all become citizens, we were all going to vote, we were living in a republic, and we were going to be part of one country. At the same time, in November 1949, exactly at the same time while this was going on in Delhi and the electoral rolls were going on, in a town called Ayodhya, in United Provinces, the Hindu Mahasabha, some of the people who had been not acquitted, they had been released after being named in Gandhi murder trial. And Hindu Mahasabha, actually I should say, was born at a time and in response to the colonial, at least in part response to colonial electoral process by which they had separate votes for Muslims. That was one of the reasons why Hindu Mahasabha was born in 1909. So for them, in their mindset, Pakistan had been created, it's a Muslim state, and India must become a Hindu state. They had already been involved in Gandhi's assassination, and Nehru had come down very heavily. There had been arrests, they had been banned, they could not function for many years, that is for two years. And now they were out, and they were planning again. This time to so-called liberate Ayodhya. This time they had learned their lesson. This time they decided to do it quietly, surreptitiously, not openly. So there was, in 49, November, they decided to go to Ayodhya, and by that time in Ayodhya, and my mother is from Faizabad, she says that there was a mosque, there was people offering namaz, and on the Chabutra, which is a raised platform, there was some Ram worship. Now suddenly these people decide that they will perform a miracle, and Ram himself will appear in the dome and produce and show that he was born under that dome. Now, it's very interesting because in the Babri Masjid case, which there's a 1,000-page judgment that has come, defendant number 10 is the president of Hindu Mahasabha. He is the one who gave a statement, and he said that Ram has been there from time immemorial. Now, if he had been there for time immemorial, then how did he appear miraculously, according to the Hindu Mahasabha, in December 1949? There's a bit of a contradiction. Other than that, if you see Anand Patwardhan's film Ram Ke Naam, then you will see a very interesting scene, which he, without even saying anything, he just pans it. And Ayodhya had hundreds of temples. It is an ancient site. And it says all these temples claimed that they were the birthplace of Ram. There was no one temple which claimed to be the birthplace of Ram. Anyway, so November 49, they had this big yagya, and they said that Ram will appear. Now, Ram did not appear in November 49 inside the mosque. He refused. And now, in December 23rd, they decided that now the miracle has to be performed. There's a whole book which is an excellent book, and I think actually I'm really horrified that this story that I didn't even know and I didn't pay attention to the story is that on the night of December 23rd, 24th, or 22nd, 23rd, they started having this huge prayer, and these sadhus were mobilized. These sadhus belonged to a particular sect, but the ones who were going to place this Ram idol inside the mosque belonged to Hindu Mahasabha. And if you see the Supreme Court judgment, you see that A, B, C belongs to Hindu Mahasabha, yet Supreme Court says it was Hindu versus Muslim. Now, in my understanding, I do not think the Hindus of India cared whether who was where, because they didn't even, most of the South Indian Hindus probably had not even heard of Ayodhya. And here was a situation where, why are they using the same colonial discourse of Hindu community versus Muslim community? They do not say Hindu Mahasabha, which is what is responsible for putting those idols. They use the same thing. And I will just read out the paragraph which the Supreme Court judgment says. The first paragraph of the 1,000-page judgment. These first appeals center around a dispute between two religious communities. It is not a dispute. It's a dispute with Hindu Mahasabha, which makes it quite different from saying it's Hindus and Muslims, both of whom claim ownership over a piece of land at measuring 1,500 square yards in the town of Ayodhya. The disputed property is of immense significance to Hindus and Muslims. That's also not true, because again, if any of you want to follow up after this and you want to read, or if you don't wish to read and you want to see videos which are easier, then there are 13 videos, 1 to 13 episodes by the Vice Chancellor of Nalsar University, who traces all this evidence that the Supreme Court would have to evaluate. He did it before the judgment came, and the 13th episode is after the episode. So you can see Faizan Mustafa's 13 episodes, and he traces it. And what he says is, if you read the Sanskrit text, I mean, he doesn't say it, he bases it on archaeological evidence and other historical evidence, that in fact Ayodhya in the ancient text was not known as a city of Ram. It was known as a city associated with Shiv worship. So where does it suddenly become Ram? And that historically that may have become, and it did become, but nowhere, foreign travelers, Huizsang came, Al-Biruni came, they came to Ayodhya, nobody mentions, Guru Nanak came, nobody mentions a Ram temple at that place. So how is the Supreme Court then saying these first appeals center around a dispute between two religious communities, both of whom claim ownership over a piece of land at measuring 1,500 square yards in the town of Ayodhya? The disputed property is of immense significance to Hindus and Muslims. The Hindu community claims it as a birthplace of Lord Ram and an incarnation of Lord Vishnu. The Muslim community claims it as a site of the historical Babri Masjid built by the first Mughal Emperor Babur. This land of ours has witnessed invasions and dissensions. Yet they have assimilated into the idea of India everyone. And it's ahistorical to say that idea of India, it was not India in 1528, it came much later. So if you see, even the Supreme Court is not paying attention. It's historically incorrect. At which time was India made? What kind of India are they talking about? And just a whole lot of assumptions in the first two paragraphs. The history and culture of this country have been home to quest for truth through the material, political, and spiritual. This court is called upon to fulfill a judiciary function. This court was called upon to simply do one thing, and that's what I want to show you today as far as Babri Masjid. This is a simple case of criminal trespass. It's nothing more. And what happened? In December 1949, these people had decided. No, before that, before this decided, how did they decide that this is where Ram was born? This is something which I haven't been able to trace. Anand Patwardhan says this, Faizan Mustafa says it, some others have also said it. I haven't got evidence for how it was done, but they say the British spread a rumor that this Babri Masjid was made over the temple of Ram. There is no evidence that there is a temple of Ram. In fact, the Supreme Court also came to the conclusion that there was no temple of Ram that was broken and this mosque was. So why this rumor was spread, at what rate? I'm quite willing to believe they spread such rumors. They did do this, but I don't know the evidence for that. But that is how the origin of the idea that Ram's temple was at that site. By which time now it had become like common knowledge, so-called, or common belief that this was where Ram's temple was. And so on that night, there were two guards. Already there was some tension. There were two guards, which are police guards, one a Hindu and one a Muslim. The Hindu guard was first on duty and the Muslim was to come second. The Hindu guard was taken over by Hindu Mahasabha, whether he was bribed or he was asked, or I do not know what happened, but he was told to disappear during his duty. And what happened is that while he was there, these 5 people broke the lock, went inside the mosque under the dome and installed these statues. Then they sat very quietly till 4 in the morning. At 4 in the morning, the Muslim guard comes around that time. When he comes maybe 3 o'clock. Then he sees this light. No, sorry, when they've installed this Ram ka Murti inside the mosque, was the guy who says the azan. He didn't see how many people, he tried to attack them. And they attacked him back, and he ran out. And he went to the village and he reported that this is happening. And after that, we never hear about him again. Then the guard returns and he sees this scene, by which time Hindu Mahasabha has mobilized the Hindus in a large number. The district magistrate, Mr. K. Nair, is standing there, helping this process. Supreme Court also notes it's not something I'm saying, Supreme Court also acknowledges his role in this. So under his protection, you see these people sitting there, and suddenly they declare miracle ho gaya, and Ram statue has appeared there. The Muslim guard, had been so terrified and he had been intimidated, or what he did, even his evidence was that a miracle happened. So now this is the FIR. And I want you to note that everyone in this FIR, the person who filed the FIR is a Hindu, the policeman who gave evidence against this Ram installation is a Hindu. It's not a Hindu-Muslim issue at all. So this FIR was filed against Abhiram Das. Abhiram Das is a member of Hindu Mahasabha. Ram Shakal Das is a member of Hindu Mahasabha. Sudarshan Das is a member of Hindu Mahasabha, plus 50-60 other persons whose names were not known under section 147 rioting, 448 trespassing, 295 defiling a place of worship under the Indian Penal Code. This was at 7 in the morning when I, Ramdeo Dubey, a Hindu Brahman, he is filing this FIR. I'm emphasizing this only to show that this was a Hindu Mahasabha conspiracy and not to do with ordinary Hindus of Ayodhya, who continue to oppose this, and in fact the first voting they voted against BJP. That at about 7 in the morning when I, Ramdeo Dubey, reached the Janmbhumi, I came to know from Mata Prasad, Constable number 7, Ayodhya Police Station, that a group of 50 to 60 persons have entered the Babri Masjid by breaking open the locks of the compound and also by scaling the walls of the staircase and placed an idol of Sri Bhagwan in it, scribbled sketches of Sita and Ramji, etc., in saffron and yellow colors on the inner and outer walls of it. That Hansraj, Constable number 70, who was on duty at that time when 50-60 persons entered, stopped them from doing so, but they did not care. The PAC guards present there were also called for help, but by then the people had already entered the mosque. Senior district officials visited the site and got into action. This senior district officials included Mr. K. Nair. Later on, a mob of 5,000 to 6,000 people gathered and tried to enter into the mosque, raising religious slogans and singing kirtans. But due to proper arrangement, nothing happened. Committees of crime, Mr. Abhinav, they were all arrested. Offences and duty and many other people have seen it, so the case has been checked and it is found to be correct. That is the FIR. This FIR is quoted at full in Supreme Court judgment, and yet they say nothing about it. Moment this happens, the Chief Minister is informed. Within few days, Nehru is informed. On 26 December, Nehru writes to the Chief Minister, I am disturbed at developments at Ayodhya. Earnestly hope you will personally interest yourself in the matter. Dangerous example being set there that will have bad consequences. So from the Prime Minister to the Chief Minister to the local administration, the Prime Minister says, remove those idols. And Mr. K. Nair, the district magistrate, he just makes excuses after excuse, refuses to do it, and he says, if I remove the idols now, I cannot guarantee the safety of the Muslim population. But what was happening? Mrs. Nair was also very active, and she is also a member of Hindu Mahasabha. She was the one who was mobilizing these sadhus to continue Akhand Path, which is a 24-hour singing. She said bhog, which she had for food, And she mobilized these people, so the sadhus never left the premise of the mosque, which they had now converted into a temple. So all the district administration was involved. All these facts are acknowledged by the Supreme Court. And now the Prime Minister is saying, in February 5th, I shall be glad if you will keep me informed of Ayodhya situation. As you know, I attach great importance to its repercussions, not on India affairs and on all India affairs, especially Kashmir. I suggest to you, when you are here, if necessary, that I will come to Ayodhya. The Prime Minister is telling the Chief Minister, look, I will come to Ayodhya, let me do something, let's remove these. But by the time Mr. Nehru is writing in February 5, 1950, K.K. Nair, he gets an order from the court to say that this is disputed territory, and under section 145, it should be taken and a receiver appointed, and it should be closed. So a receiver is appointed. He takes over control of this temple cum mosque. And against 145, what does 145 actually say? Section 145 of the Criminal Procedure Code actually says that if you know it's wrongfully disposed, then please put it back in the possession of the person whose property it is. And at that point, everyone knew it was, the FIR said it, the police said it, witnesses said it, that this is wrongfully done, and yet it was allowed to be closed. And it was closed till 87, and then 92 it was broken. And Supreme Court, and there was a very good law which Prime Minister knew, the Chief Minister knew, the DM knew, the administration knew, the courts knew, and a lot of us also had known, a lot of the liberal, democratic, many people had known, and yet this is what happened. Now, what were the repercussions? So this is what I wanted to say about the Babri Masjid, that all the rest about faith and whether this was Ram, nothing. This was a place of criminal trespass. It should have been dealt by the law. The idol should have been removed, and that would be the end, as they had done with the Gandhi murder case. And yet these people who were involved in the Gandhi murder case were able to do this to Babri Masjid, and they were free. And they continued their propaganda to the extent that the Supreme Court of India could not implement the law of the land. So this is where I want to stop as far as the Babri Masjid is concerned. So there's no question of faith, there's no question of going into whether Ram was born or not. At that point of time, the only dispute was that who put it. And if some people wanted to claim it or not claim it, there was other forums. Under the law, it was very clear. So a case of criminal trespass could become of national importance is itself a statement on the state of Indian democracy. Now I come to Kashmir. How this directly affects Kashmir. Incidentally, if you want to read about this particular this Ayodhya, The Dark Night, I think it's really a very interesting book written by Krishna Jha and some Dhirendra Jha, and it's published in 2002. I am very new to this. I don't know how to. Okay, wait. Oh, I actually found it. Ayodhya, The Dark Night, night of 22nd December, Krishna Jha and Dhirendra K. Jha. And it's a whole book on that night. Who were the characters, how it was conspired, how they installed those idols inside. And I think that's all that they should have actually talked about. Now I want to go to Kashmir. I'm going to read out from Sheikh Abdullah. Sheikh Abdullah, as you know, was the first chief minister, and he was called the Lion of Kashmir in those days. And he was the person who wanted to be with India. And he gave this speech in the Constituent Assembly of Kashmir. And that explains why he wanted to be part of India rather than part of Pakistan, and how he looked upon this. I'm not obviously going to read out the whole speech because it's very, very long. Yeah. So, the same time as the elections were being held in India in 51, they were held in 51 in Jammu and Kashmir. And it was called the Day of Achievement. It was celebrated. And this is what he had to say. This is, I may be forgiven if I feel proud once again in the history of the state. Our people have reached a peak of achievement through which I might call the classical Kashmiri genius for synthesis, born of tolerance and mutual respect. Throughout the long tale of our history, the highest pinnacles of our achievement have been scaled when religious bigotry and intolerance ceased to cramp us, and we have breathed the wider air of brotherhood and mutual understanding. You are in no doubt. Is there any light? Okay. You are no doubt aware of the scope of our present constitutional ties with India. We are proud to have bonds with India. The goodwill of whose people and government is available to us is unstinted and abundant measure. The Constitution of India has provided for a federal union, and in the distribution of please let's not have photographs. The Constitution of India has provided for a federal union, and in the distribution of sovereign powers has treated us differently from other constituent units. With the exception of the items group defense, foreign affairs, communication, and instrument of accession, we have complete freedom to frame our constitution in the manner we like. In order to live the prosper as good partners in a common endeavor for advancement of our peoples, I would advise that while safeguarding our autonomy to the fullest extent as to enable us to have liberty to build our country according to the best traditions and genius of our people, we may also be suitable constitutional arrangements with the Union establish our right to seek and compel federal cooperation and assistance. The future political setup which you decide upon in Jammu and Kashmir must also take into consideration the existence of various subgroups in our state. That's Jammu and Kashmir. Although culturally diverse, history has forged an uncommon unity between them. He is not talking about a Kashmiri Muslim identity. And then he explains, the real character of the state is revealed in its constitution. The Indian constitution has set before the country the goal of secular democracy based on justice, freedom and equality for all without distinction. This is the bedrock of modern democracy. This should meet the argument that Muslims of Kashmir cannot have security in India, where the large majority of the population are Hindus. Any unnatural cleavage between religious groups is a legacy of imperialism, and no modern state can afford to encourage artificial divisions if it is to achieve progress and prosperity. The Indian Constitution has amply and finally repudiated the concept of religious state. So that is what makes Sheikh Abdullah decide to put his eggs in Indian basket. Yet, even at that point in 51, he had seen Ayodhya. He was aware of it. He was aware of the Praja Samaj which was going around. He was aware that Shama Prasad Mukherjee in 51 had already declared that we will fight against 370. He was seeing the rising tide of Hindu nationalism. And so he said, still, another factor has to be taken into consideration. Certain tendencies have been asserting themselves in India, which may in the future convert it into a religious state. wherein the interests of Muslims will be jeopardized. This would happen if a communal organization had a dominant hand in the government and Congress ideals of the equality of all communities were made to give way to religious intolerance. So this, he warned them that this could happen. Soon after this speech, 51, in 1953, Sheikh Abdullah was arrested. And he was in jail till 75. He was not in a jail as a prison, he was kept in a guest house, but he was under detention. So 20 years he was under detention. After 20 years of detention, and it is a very strange country because Nehru actually made sure that Farooq Abdullah, Sheikh Abdullah's son, had medical education, went to England, financed all that. But nevertheless, he was in jail. When Sheikh Abdullah came back and he became chief minister in 75, this is what he said. Sheikh Abdullah returned the Indian national political mainstream as a sequel to Indira Abdullah Accord in 75. He wrote about the background. I told my Indian friends that I have no difference of opinion on the fact of Kashmir's accession to India. However, I have a difference on the limits of accession. We have decided these limits in 1947 after succession, and our agreement flowered in the shape of Article 370. So, for Sheikh Abdullah and the Kashmiris, Article 370 was the bridge between Kashmir and India. In August this year, that bridge was broken. And now, hundreds of Kashmiris who actually fought and put their lives on the line for India, they themselves were arrested and detained. So overnight, an entire valley was further alienated. Even those who were pro-India had become alienated. And the arguments that have been given by BJP, one and all, are false and historically false. And I cannot go into the large, but I did write a book which was published in 315, which is called The Many Faces of Kashmiri Nationalism. And what is interesting is that I traced the history through trade union leaders. And these trade union leaders were people who staked their life not as Indian agents, they were not raw agents, they were Kashmiri nationalists who wanted Kashmir to be part of India and not be part of Pakistan, because Pakistan didn't give rights to Kashmiris or to others. In this also, and if you have time I would read it out to you, is a 12-page letter. In fact, I've got it actually, which was written to me. I was doing the Parliament attack case. That is, 4 people were, as you know, Indian Parliament was attacked in 2001, and 4 people were arrested. And I led the campaign and the case to defend 2 of them. One of them was released, and one of Afzal Guru was hanged, and Afzal became the big bad guy, which BJP used as a whipping boy for all kinds of things. And Afzal Guru's letter here, it's in his handwriting, there are 12 pages of his letter. This letter, when it was written, I read it out to a friend here in Goa, a Goan Catholic. I don't think he knows much about Kashmir, but I just said, I want to read it out, how do you react? And he says, but I don't disagree with anything he says. And lately, if you see the jailer of Tihar jail, he has written, in fact, let me read out what the jailer says. He has published his memoirs. And what is very interesting is that I know that he was wanting to publish his memoirs. And in fact, he wanted to write about Afzal Guru. And then the government stopped him from writing about Afzal Guru. But this is what he wrote. Gupta is Sunil Gupta, the jailer, Gupta says that before carrying out an execution, the prisoner is given 2 weeks, but in Afzal's case, only 6 days were given, which were definitely enough time to inform Afzal's family and to allow for a last meeting. But the authorities deliberately decided not to inform his family. Gupta also describes how the hanging was carried out without a hangman. The last two professional hangmen had been retired. As for Afzal, Sunil Gupta says he had seen the Kashmiri reading books of other faiths. When he had not been reading, he would be saying his prayers 5 times a day. I think what Sunil Gupta is saying is that being a practicing Muslim didn't stop him from looking at other faiths. Sunil Gupta then describes the last hour with Afzal. We sat down with him and asked him if he wanted tea. As we sipped tea slowly, Afzal spoke calmly about his case. He told us he was not a terrorist and that he was not even a wanted person. All he wanted, he said, was to fight against corruption. But who listens in India? This was never my fight. I never wanted or even intended to be a Kashmiri separatist. All that I did was to fight against corrupt politicians. And then he started singing a song from 1960s movie Badal. अपने लिए जियो तो क्या जियो तो जी आदिल ज़माने के लिए. And then this lovely song picturized on the actor Sanjeev Kumar singing in prison. Like the character in the film, Afzal was telling us that everything he did was for a larger cause. There was no fear in his voice. There was just something about the way Afzal sang it that I could not help myself. I sang along with him until he stopped and asked for more tea. Unfortunately, the man who serves tea in prison had already left, so this last wish was unfulfilled. Sunil Gupta goes on to say how he shared his experience with his family. Sunil Gupta says he never went and experienced, these experiences he kept in jail, he never went. But this experience he shared with his family. And he says, I think a lot about Afzal. A lot must have heard the song in YouTube endlessly. I know that anyone who refers to him is called anti-national, but I think he was a good man and wanted to work with the NGO People's Union for Civil Liberties. All he wanted was to serve humanity for his people and to live peacefully. So I was Afzal's lawyer, and I went twice to the President of India, once with his family and the next time. And the President said, why have you come twice? And I said what Sunil Gupta said, that this man is not anti-national. In fact, he's anti-Pakistan. He didn't want to be in, he had surrendered. He just wanted a job, and yet, why has he become a symbol of hatred in this country? And as you know, that now when they had a meeting in his memory in JNU, which is our university, those students have been harassed and persecuted and maybe going to jail soon. And yet, what happened? I'm a Kashmiri Pandit. For those in Kashmir, they see my name and say I don't really identify with Kashmiri Pandits because I never went to Kashmir. But the kind of goodwill this book and this gesture created friends. It did not create enmity. It was bridge. And that campaign really helped to bridge a gap because the Kashmiris suddenly found that there were Indians willing to spend 2, 3, 4 years fighting for Kashmiris. And when I went to Afzal's house, and after he had been executed, and I talked to his wife, and the son came, and I said, oh, I didn't ask for the son. She said, you didn't want to meet Ghalib? I said, I thought you didn't want. He said, not for you. So there was that relationship that had been created, which could have built. And it's not only me. It was B. Raman who was head of RAW. B. Raman and I appeared in India Today on the media, and both of us said the same thing, don't hang Afzal. Maybe the nuance of it was slightly different, but it was a national interest, and both of us defined maybe our national interest slightly differently. And at the end of that talk, the India Today guy says, but you both agreed, what was the fun of it? We are not having debates for fun. So this is really the story of Kashmir in a very short, and of Afzal, the main so-called terrorist. And now when this finally, with this clampdown stops, or when it doesn't stop, I do not know. But the young generation's poetry, rap poetry, if any of you are interested, Ahmed Javed, 23-year-old rapper, you can see it on net, but he says in one of his raps, obviously I'm not going to rap, I was born up in war, the season of terror and slander. Losing is not in my blood. My passion is witness. I have fought death. So a generation who has grown up, and a generation who has grown up without any Kashmiri Pandits in the valley, they're going to have a very different politics. They're not going to have the faith in that politics and in that constitution with which I talked about, which we began off in this country. And even in our case, if the constitution is changed, which it is being, and the law is changed, then what is left for us? That is the question that I think we have to face. Now, last, not the least, is the Indo-Naga talks. Now, Indo-Naga talks, it's a very long history again, and there is a book which we have just brought out called Kuknalim, and that gives you the whole traces. And this is not a book, it's directly you can hear the voices of the militants, of why they went to Pakistan, they went to China, they got their arms, how they trained, and why they attacked India, what they felt about it. But whatever they felt, they finally sat at the negotiating table. Now there's a twist to this. They also wanted, they were inspired by Kashmir, they wanted the same thing. And they said, okay, if Kashmir has a special status, why can't we? And they were hoping that the talks, and we were involved, my husband and I were involved in the talks from 97 to now, that okay, we'll also have a special status. But when the special status of Kashmir was taken away, then the shadow fell over the Indo-Naga talks. I do not know whether today Modi has, I thought I would share with you what happens, but today Modi is in Nagaland and Hornbill. He's worn his Naga dress and he's romping around. I have no idea whether they will announce some agreement. But what were the Nagas asking for? A constitution and a flag. But here is the question that troubles me. Is that the constitution that the Nagas are asking for is Nagaland for Christ? Now the question is that the constitution that Kashmiris were asking for was a secular constitution. Today we have gone to where religious nationalism has taken over. And I have spent, I think now, maybe 40 years on this Naga issue, from 70s when from college, university. And I am disturbed because I don't want to live in Nagaland for Christ or Nagaland Hindu or Muslim or anything, or any religious. Now the question is that as a human rights lawyer, the question is, now what do I fight for? Do I accept this? Do I not accept it? And how does one fight? And how does one react to this? And it's not Nagaland for Christ itself, it's Nagaland for a Baptist Christ. In a religion which does not allow a Catholic to marry a Baptist without the Catholic converting. So I have a problem with that. And there in that situation, we have a situation where Catholics, I have no brief. My husband is a Catholic, but I did not go to the church. I had a civil marriage, and I have equal, I don't know, hatred or same feeling towards all religions. But the fact is that they are stopping Catholics from burying their dead. To me that was, and so for me, I fought for the Baptists to be allowed to go to their church. I fought for the Muslim identity. I say here for the Muslims because when there was a riot in violence against Muslims in Goa, I fought. But how do we fight for the ideal that I wish? And that was a secular socialist India. And that is the issue for us for the future. And that no law and constitution, because you can change the constitution, you can change the law, but those ideals remain. And last word, for those Goans who tell me that no, there's no problem here, we all lived happily together. This pamphlet, I think many of you have not seen. Berlin Wall between Hindus and Christians of Goa. I am sure most Goans don't believe this, as most Hindus don't believe in that Ayodhya, as most Christians. But there is this communalism which divides us here as well. And so when in 2002, when Modi and all met in Panjim, and I was organizing a demonstration, then a friend of mine, and I say a friend from Goa, she's told me, don't do this, we love each other. I said, you don't. So last thing which I want to say, just before coming to Goa, I was asked to speak in the India Today, speaking truth to power. And I said truth to power is stupid because power knows the truth. It is speaking truth to each other. And the truth is that somewhere we are all complicit in what has happened. And now that's the question that I leave. Thank you.